Hey, everybody. Good morning. It's Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. It is the Resistance Live for Friday, November 8th, 2019. Thanks for being here. We're going to give everybody a couple minutes to log in. And I want to thank you all for your patience yesterday. As warned, I was in LA all day yesterday for business. Y'all know that this is not my day job. So I've got a lot of exciting things cooking for 2020. I'm really stoked and I can't wait to tell you all about them, but I can't do it yet. In any event, I thank you for your patience. I also will say it was super fun. I got stuck on a train, as you all know, at LA Union Station, if you follow me on Twitter yesterday. And we did kind of like a live Ask Elizabeth Anything kind of thing, which was really fun because it had almost nothing to do with politics. So I want to thank you all for participating in that as well. If you were online asking me questions at that point, that was kind of fun. But we had some significant breaking news over the last 48 hours now that we should talk about. Including some stuff coming out of the election. But, look, the long and the short of it is that I think this whole week we should still be riding high on what happened as a result of Tuesday night, because it bodes very well for the future. The president has not handled it well, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And we have a lot more that we're going to see in the coming days as a result of the impact of the election. So, before we get to breaking news, I just want to say that it's been a good week. We should honor that it was a good week. And the impact of the election can't be understated because there's a lot more that's going to come from those results, particularly in Kentucky. I do not think that election is going to get overturned. We have indications that the GOP is actually asking for that recount to not happen. We'll progress from there as we go. All right. So, okay, so let's just talk for a couple seconds about some of the things that have happened in the last 24 hours, because once again, it's kind of like a crazy news cycle right now. All right. The biggest breaking news yesterday was about there were several segments of the anonymous book being leaked. So let me just say a couple of things about this. Rachel read a bunch of it on air last night. The Washington Post, Philip Rucker had some breaking news about it as well. The one thing that I will say about everything that we heard, however stunning it was, because let me just say this. I think you all know, because I've taken this position for quite some time, that there is a point to not getting inured to the how awful it is to have someone this unstable in the White House, right? The degree of his instability was on full display in the segments that were released on Maddow last night. And while we can say that we're not surprised that he's this crazy, it's worthwhile to continue to be this shocked, I guess is the way to put it. We may not be surprised, but we may be shocked that the most powerful person in the free world, and I know a lot of you debated whether or not he's actually that on Twitter last night, but he is. Let me just say this. He's in charge of our nuclear arsenal. He has enormous amounts of wealth at his disposal through the federal government. He's got the capacity to launch wars all over the world whenever he wants. The fact that somebody this unstable is in that position should shock anyone. Now, let me just say a couple of other things about this. I agree with the commentators who have been saying over and over and over again since yesterday that it is quite the thing to choose to stay anonymous at this stage of the game when we have multiple officials from the State Department and our intelligence agencies putting their names on the line, coming forward, risking their safety and the safety of their families to hold the president to account. I personally am not terribly impressed with the idea that there's somebody who thinks that, staying anonymous and behind the scenes with this president is a good idea, given everything that's recorded in this book. It's very clear that there's some very profound it doesn't make the scandal any less surprising. I agree with Chris Hayes's epic tweet last night, which is basically like, hey, anonymous, no shit. We all can agree that he is this nuts. But seeing it also written out like this does carry a certain degree of shock value. It's also probably one of the reasons why the president was so unhinged about an hour ago on the lawn of the White House. But that's another story. All right. So we've had additional breaking testimony over the last 2 days. We are expecting additional transcripts from Hill and Volker this morning or this afternoon, depending on where we are. Again, one thing I just want to make clear here. There's out and out lying going on right now about what these transcripts contain. Lindsey Graham, of course, has said he's not going to read them. That is a direct abdication of his duty as a senator of the United States of America and his oath of office to defend the Constitution. From where we sit on these transcripts, what everybody needs to be aware of is that, there's multiple witness testimony now about the quid pro quo from the president. So the idea that there's no quid pro quo, I just want to make this clear again, is not true. I also agree with the commentators who are saying, let's stop calling it a quid pro quo. That's almost a Russian / Republican talking point. That was a nice slip of the tongue this morning, that really the point should be at this point to call it what it is, which is extortion and bribery. Again, looking at it from the standpoint of the crimes involved, that's absolutely accurate. And by the way, you don't need a quid pro quo. I just feel like I have to keep saying this over and over again to impeach the president. There's no legal requirement on that, right? So from the standpoint of where we find ourselves, again, the president is overtly lying about what the evidence shows. He is overtly lying about the fact that the evidence has tied him to this scheme as its ringleader. And he's overtly lying about the nature of that testimony and even what's contained in that call summary that he himself released. So again, we're expecting more testimony today. My expectation is that testimony is going to be more of the same. All right. Interesting development on the subpoena front, which I know we had a lot of questions about on the question feed this morning. Mulvaney was subpoenaed, did not show up. Others have been subpoenaed and said they're not going to show up and did not show up this week to testify. There appears now to have been a decision made by the House Intelligence Committee that they're not going to pursue these subpoenas in court. Now, let me say one thing about this. This is a very different scenario from where we were earlier in the year with Don McGahn. And here is my speculation. I guess I should put it that way, although it seems pretty obvious from a legal strategy standpoint. My speculation as to why they're not pursuing them in court. So here's the thing. They've made a decision that there is an adverse inference, which, by the way, there's this is a legal term of art. There is this thing called an adverse inference that you can take when somebody refuses to testify or answer questions. And again, it depends on the circumstances and the type of case in which this happens, but there are circumstances under the law where you are allowed to assume that the refusal to provide testimony or the refusal to provide documents means that those documents and testimony would have implicated the individual involved in that case. So Schiff has made a decision that if Trump's people are being prevented from testifying by Trump, they can use that as an adverse inference of Trump's criminality. And that's fine. I don't actually disagree with that. They've also got a separate count of obstruction of justice for every single time they've prevented somebody from testifying who's been subpoenaed. But let me just say this on the optimistic front about all of this, okay? The obvious decision to not pursue these subpoenas in court, let alone in advance of, meaning like enforcement of them, let alone in advance of the public hearings that we now know are coming next Wednesday and Friday, it tells us something very specific about the position in which Schiff and Pelosi and everybody else who's running this impeachment investigation, the position in which they feel they are, okay? Because the reason why you would go pursue these subpoenas in court, if you needed the testimony, would be to secure the evidence that you needed to proceed, okay? If you are making a decision that you don't need that evidence, and those of you who have watched the broadcast for a very long time will remember that I did whole kind of like educational videos on this in 2017 and 2018 about how when you go into court to trial, you want to be three deep, what we call three deep, 3 bits of evidence deep, ideally, on every count of what you need to prove. They clearly think they're at least 3 deep. My bet is they think they're about 10 deep at this point on what they need to prove in order to impeach the president. So the decision to not pursue those subpoenas right now as a strategic decision is actually, at this moment in time, given this particular set of facts and where we find ourselves, an indication of how strong their case is on the president's abuse of power. And I take that as a good sign. You know, I'll remind you all, these subpoenas, it would be at least a month in the best scenario between when they filed that case and when we would get a result, and then it would have to be appealed. So I think they're making the right choice here. You know, again, you all know that I have been really adamant about what happens when you disregard the rule of law and the way in which the dominoes can fall from that. And I'm not pulling any of that back. But what I will say is that if I was in Schiff's position with public hearings starting next week, feeling very confident of my ability to impeach the president based on the evidence I already had, I would also say I'm not going to enforce that subpoena right now because I don't need it. We've got enough already. Like, let them try. It's a hell of a position to be in, honestly. That's what they're telegraphing right now. And from a position of strength, I feel like it's the right decision, frankly. So that's that. You know, it doesn't change the fact that, you know, evading a subpoena is unlawful. It doesn't change the fact that those people could be sanctioned or arrested. But what it does mean at this moment in time is that Schiff knows he's got the president dead to rights. And that in and of itself as a signal is very significant. All right. Other bit of breaking news we had yesterday is that the Trump Foundation has settled its the criminal investigation by the New York State Attorney General into whether or not the foundation had used money to benefit Trump's campaign in violation of nonprofit law. Indeed, notwithstanding the fact that the president said otherwise, in the plea agreement, the Trump Foundation admitted that it had in fact fraudulently and unlawfully used money from the foundation to pay for Trump's campaign expenses, and to do other things like buy paintings. Trump then went out and made this crazy public statement saying that he had admitted no wrongdoing and that the reason why they settled the case was something else. And that, and all of that's a lie, by the way. Like, Tish James could walk into court and get him sanctioned for saying that sort of stuff if she would care to. But the long and the short of it is the Trump Foundation is going to pay $2 million in penalties that will be distributed to actual nonprofits, apparently, in exchange for the end of this particular investigation. So let me just say this. I want to remind you all that everything that this administration has done and everything that happened in the campaign was projection. You will all remember the crazy amount of attention and detail, and the media lapped this up, that was given to the Clinton Foundation, which, by the way, right now has a 4-star rating from the governing body that decides whether or not charitable foundations are real. Again, it's all projection. All of it is projection. So this, again, is one example of that. Okay. The other thing that I just want to say here with regard to this dovetails into something that we had a question about this morning, has to do with media bias. We saw a breaking story yesterday morning that I got very upset about, which was like, Elizabeth Warren has a new problem. She's angry and aggressive. And, again, I'm going to remind you all that like the media bias, particularly on gender, was so prominent in 2016. We're seeing reemergences of it in 2020. The good news is that more of us are holding those kind of stories to account. There's a lot more public outcry when they happen. There continues to be a focus, again, I hate to say it, on white male, older candidates right now, and Pete Buttigieg, and a kind of ignorance of the fact that Elizabeth Warren is leading in the polls in Iowa in significant ways right now. I'm not expecting any of that's going to change. I'll just tell you. I think what needs to happen in response to it, though, is that all of us do our jobs. Again, here we are back at participatory democracy again, of shouting out how it looks, right? And shouting out the bias. And we need to do that not just for the institutions that are doing it, but honestly for everybody else who's reading it and everybody else who's following you, even if it's only 28 people. Because the way that we increase education about bias is by talking about bias. So we have to do that. It feels to me like it's really necessary that that takes place. Also, on the Elizabeth Warren front yesterday, Ayanna Pressley endorsed Elizabeth Warren, as did Black Women For, which, by the way, I was so stoked about this. It's 100 of some of the most powerful Black women in the country have all now, through the organization Black Women For, come out and endorsed Elizabeth Warren. This was a huge deal. It includes people like Dream Hampton, who made the Surviving R. Kelly film. It includes people like Imani Gandhi, who you all know I follow and adore. So from the standpoint of the endorsements of Elizabeth Warren, they are growing, and Ayanna Pressley is another voice behind that. I'll also just mention that in the event that Elizabeth Warren wins the presidency, the governor of Massachusetts names her replacement in the interim. Ayanna Pressley, I will remind you all, is a representative from Massachusetts. It would not surprise me if we end up at the end of this with Senator Ayanna Pressley, which I think would be a really kind of phenomenal thing. I'm a huge fan of hers. So in any event, that was another really great breaking news endorsement from yesterday. Okay. Trump was on the White House lawn this morning. I just want to mention, because it's a good time to kind of he called this morning for the whistleblower to be prosecuted for treason. He also claimed, again, that there was no quid pro quo. Again, we've already talked about that on this broadcast, that was a lie. The decompensation in real time is happening. It's going to continue happening. He's criming in real time every day right now. And, again, I'm going to remind you all, extinction bursts are a real thing. The broadcast we did about this in 2017, I will just say was way prescient. I'm not an I told you so person, but we talked about extinction bursts ad nauseum 2 years ago. And that, as we got closer to the end of the Trump presidency, we would see increasingly erratic behavior and acting out. That's continuing to happen right now. And it's not going to get any better until he's gone. One other thing I want to mention in relation to all of this, by the way, is that there was this breaking story yesterday that Trump is now in talks with Mark Burnett to do an apprentice White House style television show when he's out of office. I'm going to tell you all right now, I think that is a great idea. And I'm not going to say it from the standpoint of, I don't mean I'm going to watch the show. You all will remember that when we've had conversations on the broadcast about the nature of him potentially being leveraged into resigning, one of the things that we've talked about is the kind of like narcissistic personality disorder need for narcissistic supply. And one of the things that I've advocated for all along is that if the president was going to be leveraged to resign, it was going to have to be with a path that gave him some way back in his own mind, even if it was only until he went to prison, to get attention from the general public. So the idea that, you know, like he can quit and go have a TV show that's The Apprentice White House, and that is what he thinks his legitimate exit is going to be, doesn't bother me one bit. And we will then see what happens with the various prosecutions that follow after that. But I saw that as quite an interesting opening, frankly. All right, we still are seeing some cracks in the GOP wall. I want to just urge all of you to continue making your phone calls. There is an urgent need right now, by the way, to advocate as well for the lack of appointment of this particular judge. Now I'm going to forget his name. He's not a judge yet. There is a lawyer who is vastly unqualified, very far right-wing, horrible, nasty, alt-right, racist viewpoints, Stephen Menashe, passed through the Judiciary Committee yesterday on the third try. He needs to be voted down on the floor of the Senate. The only way that that's going to happen, by the way, is flipping the same people that we need to flip for impeachment. So please continue making your calls. You know, the list of moderate senators has been up and circulating repeatedly on the Patreon feed over and over again. I want to encourage you to keep doing that today. It's great practice for what we're going to need in the coming weeks. Final reminder, there are going to be live hearings next Wednesday and Friday. 2 witnesses on Wednesday, 1 witness on Friday. Yovanovitch is on Friday. That's going to be not to be missed. Get ready. Like basically is what I have to say. We're really in for it next week, and it's going to be very intense. All right, final thing for today. Today is the closing day for Rise Forever. I want to just mention that we had a Rise alum who won her election on Tuesday night in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Super stoked about that. We had literally dozens of our alums working as precinct monitors and out canvassing on the day of the election on Tuesday. If you yourself want to head into 2020, knowing how to use your voice as an advocate and an activist and a leader in the best possible way, today's your last chance to get in on this class. So class starts Monday, GaiaLeadershipProject.com/rise. The cart is open today until 8 p.m. Pacific. You can register until that time. I'm just going to say it. I really want to see as many of you as we can possibly get into this class for its last incarnation. We have great things coming up in 2020, but this is the last time we're going to run it. So please get in. And I'm just going to say, Deborah said this on the broadcast the last couple of days. She saved labor and delivery services at her local hospital thanks to the training that she got in Rise. We have stories like this over and over again. So your ability to use your voice and your activism in your local community is going to make a massive difference in the coming year. And I just would really encourage you to get in. We have payment plans that, you know, you belong in it if you feel at all called to it. All right, GaiaLeadershipProject.com/rise. Hope to see all of you in it. Have a great weekend. There's no broadcast on Monday because it's Veterans Day. But there will be broadcasts next week. There is a slight potential glitch on Thursday, but I'm working around it and we'll see what we can do there. It might be an earlier broadcast in the day or a later broadcast in the day, but hang on to that. And I will see you all next week, obviously, with a lot of commentary and observation and analysis of the live hearings that we're going to see that are projecting us into impeachment in a very public way now. All right. Much love to all of you. Have a great weekend. Bye.